So typically when you're flying to Rome, you want to visit so much more than just Rome, right? So from Rome, you might want to proceed to Cortona or to Naples or to Milan, Pisa. So you are looking naturally on the internet how to get to those places, and you
Mm.
find some trains, you find rental cars, and then you find day trip, and you might decide, oh, this is actually what I'm looking for because they'll pick me up at the hotel. There will be someone speaking English, and
Mhm.
I can actually stop at this great osteria or winery in the middle of the trip and get some local experience on top of the transfer.
Welcome to the Rideshare Guy podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years' experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
Tomáš Turek is the CEO of Daytrip. Daytrip is a travel platform connecting travelers with local drivers and guides in 7,800 plus cities worldwide. With a background in computer science and a degree in environmental management, Tomáš is a driving force in redefining travel experiences. I'm excited to chat today. How are you, Tomáš?
Thanks for having me, Harry. I'm very well, and yeah, thanks for having Daytrip and me on the
Yeah.
podcast.
Definitely. No, I think you'll soon learn why I was eager to chat with you. I guess the preview is that, I feel like a lot of drivers have kind of pitched me this idea, or, there's sort of individual drivers out there kind of doing a version of this, but you have actually commoditized it and turned it into a product and a company really that sounds like it's going pretty well. So for those who may not have heard of Daytrip, what's the quick pitch? What do you guys do and what service do you offer?
I had a very shortest form. What we do is intercity ride sharing, but there's so much more to that. So our main audience are travelers traveling to foreign countries, to different continents, who need to visit multiple destinations, travel from city to city, and we provide them with drivers who are not only safe drivers, but they speak English, they are
Mm.
knowledgeable about the area, and you can spend the hours in the car actually having a conversation about local history, about local culture. And on top of that, we have curated a database of about 10,000 points of interest around the world, which you can use as intermediate stops on your travels. So if you traveled by flight or by train, you would have to skip all these interesting
Mm.
castles, national parks, little towns in between the big destinations.
Very cool. So it's sort of like a tour guide meets Uber. How does that description fit with you?
Yeah, and we often compare it to the early days of Airbnb or
Hmm.
to couch surfing in terms of the authenticity of the local touch, the local connection you get from your host. But of course, with all the convenience of a reputable ride sharing platform, the driver is there for you. So you have a door-to-door service, you have all the care and guidance that you need on your holiday.
Very cool. What are your biggest markets and sort of what's like one of your most popular day trips?
So in terms of destinations, it very much copies the most popular destinations worldwide for tourists. So it's Italy, it's France, Spain, those southern Western European countries. But we are also present and very successful in regions like Southeast Asia,
Hmm.
Eastern Europe, Latin America. Mexico, of course, is the most
Hmm.
visited country by Americans. So it's one. We are also present in Africa and the Middle East and other parts of the world, and recently also in parts of the United States. So you can come across us when looking for trips in California as well, for example.
Got it. So let's say I am a traveling tourist from American. All right, let's go with this stereotype for now. And I want to go to Rome, Italy. I want to fly into Rome, Italy. How would I sort of find your service? And then what would be my options? And like, what would I book? Like, how do the logistics work?
So typically, when you're flying to Rome, you want to visit so much more than just Rome, right? You're
Yeah.
flying across the Atlantic. So, and Italy is wonderful in that there's so much to see everywhere. You just put your pin on the map. There's something very old and very interesting in that country. And
Mm.
so from Rome, you might want to proceed to Cortona or to Naples or to Milan, Pisa. So you are looking naturally on the internet how to get to those places, and you
Mm.
find some trains, you find rental cars, and then you find day trip, and you might decide, oh, this is actually what I'm looking for because they'll pick me up at the hotel. There will be someone speaking English, and
Mm.
I can actually stop at this great osteria or winery in the middle of the trip and get some local experience on top of the transfer.
Got it. So it's sort of if I'm going to Rome and I'm just going to stay there for a week, would this service, I guess there I could still use it, but I might do more of like, as the name would imply, a day trip versus if I'm flying into Rome and then driving to Naples. That seems like sort of the best use case right there, right?
And I think it's the best way to enjoy the country, to visit several big cities and just use the small destinations as a stops for sightseeing along the way. But you can use us for the day trips from Rome and
Yeah.
go back as well. It's still the same authentic experience from the local driver
Yeah.
who can act as sort of a guide.
Yeah. So I really like this concept. And I think anyone who's traveled to Southeast Asia, I mean, this sort of already exists, right? When you go to Bali, a lot of times, for example, right? Like they, I don't know exactly, but hotels or, it's like obviously very cheap, much cheaper in Southeast Asia than Western Europe, right? So I think like that concept of having a driver is kind of already, it's not like you don't have to be, a billionaire to have your own personal driver. And so I did this when I went to Southeast Asia. I remember we had a driver named Numan. I feel like half the country in Bali is named Numan, but that's inside joke if you've been to Bali. And he kind of, I remember we stopped for lunch in this rice paddy. It was like a really beautiful location, and he was pointing things out, and so it was really cool. So I really feel like from a customer, kind of perspective, this is awesome. Let's talk a little bit about the drivers for a second. So who are your drivers? Are these, they Uber driver during the day and then they do this on the side, or is this just sort of a side hustle for them? What do most of your drivers look like?
And this is the great thing about the service. It attracts all kinds of people from different backgrounds as drivers. And it's so interesting, not only for the customer to actually meet new people, discover new locations, do a little road trip. It's also interesting for the provider, for the driver. So we get people interested coming from different backgrounds, whether they are established ride-sharing drivers, and this is a more pleasant and better paid job than just hopping around the city with an Uber. Or there might be people who are freelancers working on a irregular schedule and then just doing this for fun or for an extra income.
Yeah.
There are people who quit their job to just go drive for day trip because it's so convenient.
Cool.
So it's very diverse, and it depends on the country as well. And you mentioned Bali, and it's always great to come to a market where both the providers and the customers already have this expectation, and the market already exists. We are just cultivating it and bringing it online and kind of leveling up the quality.
So I think it sounds like on the driver side, which is pretty typical, there isn't one specific driver, right? It's sort of very diverse, lots of variability, lots of different personas, old, young, female, male, work full time, work part time. I guess I would imagine for this type of job, though, it probably really pays to have, sort of that tour guide knowledge, right? History, local points of interest, right? You can't, just be some random person off the street to do kind of a great job at this. Like you got to have some insider information, right? I mean, I guess you could do it, but like the best day trippers, I imagine, have some insider information. So how do you account for that? Is it sort of just, drivers get rated, and the higher ratings they are, sort of obviously that kind of tells you, or is there training that you provide, or how do you sort of ensure the quality experience, so I don't get into the car and this guy's like, where do you want to go? Let's go to Pizza Hut, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely support our drivers with all kinds of materials about the history, about also practical info, where to go to eat, where to park the car on the sightseeing stop, and where to take the customers first. But we also embrace their differences and their authentic personalities. So you would be surprised how often customers actually value not the textbook knowledge about history, but really the personal touch of the driver. Each of them has their own stories, their own legends, their own life experience, and often the discussions are about how life is in the country now rather than just the history. So as long as the customer is happy, we give the drivers a lot of leeway, and of course the ratings matter after that.
Got it. Yeah, no, I like that because like you said, every person is so different and unique. So it's hard to kind of replicate the exact same experience across every driver, but it's sort of like kind of trying to ensure, okay, they've got some of the basics, they know where the Colosseum is in Rome, right? But beyond that, it's like they might take you, they might be more of a pizza person, so they know a bunch of good pizza recommendations. Another driver might be more of a pasta person, right? So they know all of those good spots. So there is some kind of cool, personal touch and variability. So I think this sounds pretty cool for drivers. So what would be kind of like I mean, let's focus on Western Europe, since I think, people are so familiar. If I'm a day trip driver, what might a typical itinerary look like for me as a driver? How much money would I make?
So it's as everywhere, the prices depend on supply and demand in each country. But initially, we start with some calculation of how much it costs to run the car, how much is the typical wage in that country, in that position, and calculate the prices flat from that, flat price per trip. And the drivers can make pretty decent money, let's say close to the average salary or more, depending on how much they drive. There are some daily minimums, for example, so that's different from Uber or so. So even if you drive just a short trip, you get some minimum daily pay and so on.
Got it.
And then we optimize the logistics, of course, to eliminate empty legs and generate extra income for the driver.
So I guess if comparing it, if let's say I'm an Uber driver in Italy and I do day trips on the side, for a 8-hour day trip versus 8 hours of Uber driving, would I expect to make same, more, less doing day trip? What are you guys trying to position this as if that's the case?
It should be definitely more. It should be definitely more than driving for 8 hours in the city. There's especially event surge pricing, stuff like that. We also have our surge pricing, of course, because travel is very seasonal and sometimes the demand excesses the supply. But generally, drivers do not complain about getting paid less than Uber. On the contrary, they get paid more. And so you can imagine the job is so much more pleasant spending several hours with people who are excited about discovering your country rather than just hopping from bar to bar, restaurant to restaurant, meeting to meeting in the city.
Well, I think what's interesting is that, I've done Uber driving in Los Angeles, and that's kind of, I grew up in LA and I live in LA. And that's kind of one of the things, when people get into my car, and especially tourists, right? If they're asking for like I love giving out food recommendations and, my hidden spots. And so it's sort of like that times 10, because now you're driving all over the country and providing that. So it seems like a really rewarding and kind of fun job. I don't know that it's for every Uber driver. Some Uber drivers just want to not talk and have the passenger get in. But I feel like for those that are kind of into that side of things, it would be really fun.
We reflect that in our interview process as well. We check the personality traits. We want to make sure it's a good personality fit. It's someone who will enjoy being with the travelers for several hours in one car, as well as being a pleasant personality for the customer to be with.
Yeah. So this is a little bit in the weeds, but so I guess what type are you, what is the company Daytrip licensed, and what is the insurance for these types of trips? Like, do you guys consider yourselves like a for hire, livery company, just like Uber? And I guess this might be where it gets a little tricky, right? Because the regulations are different, across the world, right? So what is the sort of, I guess, like licensing or insurance kind of requirements that you kind of have to provide for each of these trips? I imagine I can't just be some random driver off the street, or maybe I can, right, and do a day trip. How does it work there on sort of the, licensing side?
If you're coming to the topic from the US position in California, for example, we have recently acquired the TNC license, number 13 company in California with
cool.
This TNC license and the associated insurance that is required for that and everything. So you really can be any driver from the street, and the terms are pretty much the same as for Uber or Lyft. In other countries, the regulations different. We are present in more than 100 countries now, and that would be 100 different regulations. So
that's kind of what I was thinking. That's sort of, I opened up a can of worms. I was like, wait, you guys are a worldwide company. And okay, so let's focus on the California example, because I'm, very familiar with that. So like you said, you are a licensed transportation network company, right? Which means that people can book or have to book rides via an app, or I think an online portal, and then you provide liability and insurance, at certain limits during certain periods. So I guess that's nice. As a driver, I can basically, like me, as someone with a person, a car and personal insurance, I can sign up for Daytrip and do this. Sounds like I can do this right now in California. That's pretty cool, huh?
Absolutely. Contact our onboarding department, and tomorrow maybe you can get a customer.
So let's talk a little bit about your US expansion. When did you go? What was sort of the impetus for coming to the US? How long have you guys been operating here, and which states are you in?
So the initial impulse actually came from our customers, because most of our customers are still Americans traveling to Europe, traveling to Mexico and other parts of the world. And they were like, oh, this is great service. Why aren't you in my home state, or why aren't you in US if I'm traveling like from East Coast to the West Coast and don't want to rent a car or something? So, or sometimes it was like, can I drive for you in Florida, for example? So it really came from the community, and we realized it's actually an idea that this can hold water. So we started with the most populous and most visited state, and we are expanding to other states as well. But as I said, We are in 100 countries and it's 100 different regulations. Well, in the US, it's 50 states and 50 different regulations. So you really have to go from state to state, and we are progressing one by one.
Interesting. Well, I think California is definitely a good place to start. Is that the only state that you guys are currently licensed in the US?
Right now, yes, it's the only one where we are at TNC, and in other states on the West Coast and in Florida, I think we are working with TCP companies and drivers. So it's a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess if I'm an Uber Black driver, in Florida, for example, I already have commercial insurance. I already have my own, TCP license, basically, which allows me to do, for hire trips. And so I could sort of add this on pretty easily and legally. So that makes sense. But yeah, I imagine the sort of, when people think Uber, they're thinking more UberX, right? The 90% of the business that's me, some guy with a car or girl and, driving off the street. So how's it going in California? What's the feedback been like from customers, drivers? If you have numbers or anything you want to share there, I'd love to dive in.
We started just a month ago or so, and it's going great. We see a significant number of bookings through our API connected partners. So we see that the demand is there, not only the demand that we manufacture in our market, but also in the wider market. And we get positive feedback on the drivers in general. It's the first place where we get zero complaints about the driver's English. So that's great.
That's
and
good point.
Yeah, sorry to our drivers in Ireland and the UK, but yeah, so it's going great, and I think there's still great potential to expand in California, but also in other parts of the United States. It's such a huge country and so amazing with all the things to see there. So we want to definitely lean in a bit further into the sightseeing part there and open up the service not only to, let's say, domestic travelers who are traveling in their home state, but also people traveling from more distant parts of the US or even international travelers visiting the US.
Yeah, you mentioned API connected partners. What type of companies are those? And they're finding, I guess customers are finding your Daytrip through them?
Yeah, it's already a significant chunk of our business. Those are online travel agencies or aggregators of ground transportation, offering it to different online travel players. And the whole online travel ecosystem is pretty interconnected, and everyone works with everyone else. So it's essential to have an API and offer it through different channels.
So if I book a flight or a hotel on Kayak or Expedia or one of those sites, and then they send you an email the next day, like, how are you going to get to, from the airport to your your hotel? Daytrip might be listed as one of those options or something like that.
You might find us as an ancillary service there and already book us interactively. Yeah.
Gotcha. Very cool. Very cool. So I'm on the site right now. I typed in from Los Angeles to Coachella, that was the first one that popped up. That's where they do the big music festival in Palm Springs. So it's about a 2-hour ride. I see book a trip for $300. And then there's a couple options to visit these sites along the way. So it recommends Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, Dana Point Harbor. So these are all pretty cool places. And then you can kind of add a stop for, $100, for example. So I guess in some cases, it sounds like these stops might even be pre-populated, or it sounds like, with the driver, you could kind of work out an itinerary or just leave it up to them, I'm guessing too, right?
Yeah, in general, we have a pretty strong content team that creates these suggestions, and usually we don't want to overwhelm the customer with choice. So we usually offer 6 stops, but you can also request your custom itinerary. We have a lot of people, for example, coming to Europe and looking for their ancestral places and villages where their grandmother came from. And so we can also provide stuff like that. But in general, customers want us to recommend something to show them what is the most interesting thing around and to fix that itinerary while booking. But then it's up to the driver to provide some more specific insights into those places.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the biggest differences from Europe to the United States with this type of model? Do you think the company can have sort of better product market fit, be bigger, more opportunity, less opportunity? What do you sort of think comparatively?
I think in countries outside the US, in Europe, but especially in like less visited regions like Eastern Europe or even Middle East or Africa, there's a lot of value in the convenience, in the security and safety that the online platform brings. You get someone who speaks English, you're not immediately lost after arriving in the foreign country. You don't have to navigate driving in the foreign country, sometimes on the wrong side of the road. So this is a lot of value that is pretty easy to understand for the customers. In the US, of course, we have nothing of that. Americans traveling in America are generally familiar with how it works there. So we have to double down on the value for money that we provide and the convenience of the service in comparison with short haul flights or with renting a car and so on.
Yeah, no, that is a good point. I remember, I've traveled a lot over the years and, especially when you go to certain places, LATAM, right? You have to, there's a lot of research you need to do. Like, okay, if the taxi driver starts going this way, you might be you know what I mean? Like, and some of this is maybe more real than not. And, but it's definitely like a worry, right? Versus, I think in the US, like if you're getting picked up at LAX, I think it's a very, very low risk of anything going awry, whether you get picked up by a taxi, an Uber or Lyft, take the bus, public transportation, whatever it might be. It's pretty, I think, relatively safe in those respects. So it does seem like with the US, it's more about the experience, right? Like, where is this driver going to take you? What can they show you? And I think I'm kind of curious to get your perspective on kind of like, I think there's opportunity, like, hey, to show people a day trip around Los Angeles, kind of show, hey, here's all, like, don't go to Hollywood, go to, I don't know, go to certain spots that I like, right? Certain food. I'm blanking right now. I'm from LA. Oh, Greystone Mansion is what I'm thinking of. Like, that's one of the places I really like taking people to in Beverly Hills. It's up in the hills and it's like a really beautiful old house that I don't think many tourists, would find from a Google search, right? And it's not impossible to find, but it's like, kind of those in the city spots versus I could also take someone, up the coast from LA to San Francisco, for example, and, or LA to Santa Barbara. And there's a bunch of amazing and cool places and wineries and things like that to stop. So how do you think about the two different experiences, sort of like inter-city versus, I guess, intra-city, right? And I don't know which one is which, but I think inter would be from one city to the next and intra would be within Los Angeles, right?
I like where you're going with that because, whether you're traveling from LA to San Francisco or you just want to return to LA and see some spots around that are not so visited or not so well known by tourists, we really like about our service and about our company and this is a big topic in travel, especially in Europe, that some places are over visited and the locals don't like tourists that much anymore because some city centers become unlivable and too gentrified. So even in the context of LA or in the context of Venice, not the Californian Venice, but the Italian Venice or Amsterdam, those are places that are already fed up with tourists, and it's so much more rewarding for the tourists actually not to fight this, but to go find some places that remain undiscovered or underdiscovered, and that both in the economic sense, the locals there still welcome the economic impact of tourism, but also are not overwhelmed by tourism. So our service, if you compare it to just flying from one city to another or staying in the big city and just being locked up there, I think what our service offers is really to show you those smaller towns, little gems in the countryside that would be very hard to discover otherwise, or to even reach them by other means of transportation. And regardless whether you're going to the next city or just returning to your destination for the night.
Yeah, no, I like the way you put it. I mean, there's always going to be people, right? It's sort of funny, right? Everyone complains about things, or, they're too popular or too many visitors. It's like, if you've got a great place, people are going to find it. They're going to want to go. They're going to tell their friends, right? So it's like, it's hard to keep anything great a secret forever, right? By nature, if it's great, it's not going to stay a secret. And so I think you're always going to have those people kind of going to Barcelona, Venice. And it seems to me, this is like an opportunity, or, I guess the opportunity that I like here and where I see a lot of potential is opening up that inner city travel. People want to come to Barcelona, like, let's go do a day trip, or, hey, let us take you from Barcelona to, the southern tip of Spain, right? Where Mallorca, or I guess Mallorca is an island, but, all of those cities in the south of Spain. So my Europe geography is a little slow, and along the way, let's add an extra night or two. We'll stop in some small towns and, kind of open up tourism there. I imagine, what's sort of your reception been from cities? Do you even work with cities, or is is it sort of, I imagine they would like that part more so than, kind of the intracity that we talked about. What is your sort of thinking there as far as like working with local populations and cities and all that?
Yeah, we have the advantage that unlike inner city ride sharing companies, we are not really fighting the local councils, or we are very much symbiotic with them. So we can bring people
Symbiotic.
in,
That's a
we
good
can
one.
take
That
people
was kind of
out,
the word I was thinking of. I like that. Yeah.
and we like to work with national tourism boards, for example,
Yeah.
where it makes sense to also help open up the lesser known spots in their countries, right? Because this is what they are trying to do there. If you ask the Spanish tourism board, they will not be advertising Barcelona as the destination, because everyone knows that. They will be
Yeah.
advertising the lesser known places which can still benefit from the influx of tourists. So I think we are pretty aligned on that front. And what's interesting is that customers themselves are finding these use cases and being able to book anything on our site. I mean, any destination to, or any origin to any destination with any stop in between. We can actually use this data to figure out what customers really want and what to put forward for other customers.
Yeah, I see a lot of local commerce opportunities. And this is one thing that I think I really enjoy about, especially the gig economy. I think that Uber and others, Uber specifically, sometimes, rideshare, they get, kind of talk, maybe a lot of stuff talked negatively about them. But when you think about it, right, if 60, 70% of every single fare is going back to that driver, right, like of the revenue, of the profits, right, it really is a lot of money coming back to kind of a local or circular economy. So I imagine there's a lot of interesting partnership opportunities for you, because it is so symbiotic. Of course, the national tourist boards. I imagine though, like restaurants, right? Like all the restaurants, all the local venues, right? Like this can add, and then of course, like cities that kind of want more tourism, right? But like, you obviously you go to Italy and they want to do a food tour, right? Stuff like that. Have you noticed that there are any like where like I see unlimited kind of potential partners there, but if you had to kind of identify two or three where you've had the most success so far, or that you think you can kind of get the most traction from, where you're most aligned, what have they been?
Like you mentioned it in Italy, it's all about food, all about wine. We try to stay independent, so we try to not to charge commissions to those parts and really make sure that our customer gets where we would recommend it, not where we get some kickbacks. So for us, this is a matter of pride and of positioning, that we really try to keep the product very clean and keep only one source of revenue, which is the commissions charged to the drivers. Similar percentage as Uber, as Lyft, nothing unusual there. So we sometimes happen to get, a box of Prosecco from a winery where we bring a lot of customers, but we otherwise refuse commissions from such partners so as not to be locked up in some partnership and offer our customers the authentic experience that they want.
Got it. What are the fees and commissions that you charge on a typical trip?
The typical fee we charge the drivers between 20 and 25%. It's dynamic, but pretty industry standard.
Got it. And that obviously covers you guys provide insurance for each trip and sort of licensing, I guess, indirectly, directly, and then obviously, kind of set up the trip for them and handle the payments and all that.
Yeah, as required by local regulations, we provide the insurance and licensing, and we always cover the cost of payments, which is, of course, a significant cost for any online marketplace.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I'm excited to try out Daytrip as both a customer and a driver. I don't know how many of those you have, but I think I can provide some value on both sides. So very cool that you guys are launching in California, and wish you the best of success. If folks want to learn more about driving for them, I know we've got a lot of drivers in California. Where can they go? Where can they learn more about you and the company?
You can just open our homepage, trip.com, and there's a link to the driver sign-up page, and our representatives will get back to you within days.
Cool. What is the process like to apply to be a driver with Daytrip?
So first you just fill out the simple online form, and then it's a more formal about an in-person or video call interview, standard background checks, document verification. And if the trained representative of Daytrip gives you a green light, so you can open up the profile, you can fill out your calendar, and then we start sending you trips. If you're a new driver, you will get some initial trips quickly to get up to speed, and then you get your first rating, and the higher the rating goes, the more jobs you will be getting over time. So it's pretty simple.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So, and then are there any specific vehicle requirements that I need?
Yes, there's a list of approved vehicles for each category. We have the standard sedan category, then we have a sort of black or luxury category, and we also have a minivan category for larger groups of customers. So you can upload the vehicles you have at your disposal, and you'll be getting the appropriate trips for that category.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, I'm excited to try it, and always cool to hear about another option for drivers to make money. And I think this sounds pretty unique and well suited for a lot of folks in our audience. So thank you, Tomáš.
Okay, thank you, Harry, for having me today, and have a good day.